Welcome. I am Professor Eunice Casad Garcia from the Florida A&M University College of Law, and I have here with me today Attorney Vernisha Mayweather. She's a
Hello.
practitioner and a fellow with the Virgil Hawkins Fellowship of Central Florida. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of the pandemic and evictions. So before we go into that, just to make sure everybody understands that this recording is for informational and educational purposes, it's not intended for specific legal advice of any case. If you have any concern or questions, we do highly recommend that you contact an attorney for assistance. Okay, so Vernisha, this is what I found doing a little bit of research regarding the impact of the pandemic and renters. And it all has to do essentially with the economy. As you know, with the pandemic, we are in a COVID recession, as you know. So the big three areas that we can look at in regards to renters is the economy and the housing crisis pre-pandemic and now during the pandemic, since we're still in the pandemic.
Right.
And those three areas are an economic recession, especially in the unemployment and low wage area, affordability crisis with household cost burden families and the high rents in many states and many cities, and housing inventory. There's insufficient affordable housing. I do want to mention that these are not situations that have come up during the pandemic. They were already pre-existing. It's just the matter that with the pandemic, they have become worse.
Right.
So first of all, with the economic recession, the unemployment, data shows that the unemployment rate peaked at the beginning of the pandemic or the lockdown. Back in April of 2020, it shot up to about 14.8%. It has gone down, but it's still high. It is still high as of December. So it's around 6.7 in December, the unemployment. In the early months of the recession, again, at the beginning of the pandemic, employment concentrated in industry that provided in-person services, especially leisure and hospitality industry. Those areas experienced unemployment rate of 39.3%. During April, it has again gone down, but it's still high as of December at about 16.7%. We are in Central Florida, and it was very obvious. We know that major theme parks closed, hotels shut down, some restaurants shut down. So, and there's a huge part of our community that work in those areas, in the hospitality and leisure. So we were really hit hard in Florida. So, and it's still long lasting, you know,
Right.
people were furloughed, or they were laid off after a couple of months of, you know, not knowing what's going to happen, and or their hours were cut because, you know, the services have been cut, so they're cutting their hours.
Right.
So it all contributes to the unemployment situation around the nation and in Florida. Part-time workers experience an unemployment rate of almost twice of that of full-time employees. So in April again of 2020, it was 25.5% versus 12.9%. So part-time workers, the rate was 25%, and full-time workers was at almost 13% back in April. This, according to the data, has reduced some, but again, it's still high. It's still happening. An important thing to highlight about, you know, the effects of the pandemic when it comes to unemployment, obviously, is, you know, what communities have been impacted the most. So obviously, racial and ethnic minorities had relatively high unemployment rates in April. 16%, almost 17% for Black workers compared to 14% for white workers. 18 or almost 19% for Hispanic workers compared to 13% 13.6 for non-Hispanic workers. Again, it's still high. It might have closed up a little bit, the gap, but it's still high. So still a lot of people overall who are unemployed or their hours have been considerably reduced, which then translates that there's a reduction in household income, right? So the other part of the economic recession is low wages. This has been a topic that's been pre-pandemic. It's been low wages. Right. But now with the COVID recession, again, it's made it worse. So, so like any type of recession, insecure families or household cost burden families have been the hardest hit during the COVID-19 recession. So at least there's 40% in the US of employees or workers that earn $15 an hour or less, which is causing a problem not only with cost of living and affordability, but also being able to get out now of this recession and accumulating debt, one of them being rent, if they're struggling with that. So it is common to see that workers in low wage, no benefit workplaces during that pandemic have been forced to continue working if whatever they work in is still functioning, in order to survive, to be able to pay bills or at least cover some basic needs. And this causes a problem as well because, you know, they're exposing themselves to the virus.
Exactly.
Propagating, you know, the contagion. So it's a vicious cycle. You know, one thing is connected with the other. The other thing that became very evident, and again, this was not something that was caused by the pandemic. It was pre-pandemic. It just trickled in. Is that, you know, cost burden families, low income families, either had very little savings or no savings at all.
Right.
Financially, they were not prepared for this recession. I don't think anybody is for any recession, but as to, you know, the causes of this recession, no. So the economic fallout combined with housing unaffordability has put many renters, including homeowners, at risk of losing their housing during 2020. And that has rolled over into 2021. There have been several protections that have been enacted and put in place in response to this effect of financial hardship on families, especially renters. But it's still something so temporary, and they really don't offer a full remedy or relief for what these families are going through, and you know what they're going to be going through once these are no longer available. And Attorney Mayweather will be discussing those in a little bit. So right now, that's what we're seeing. A lot of unknowns, a lot of concerns as to what's going to happen now and what's going to happen afterwards. So with the loss of incomes, many households have struggled or had little confidence in their ability to pay rent, struggle to pay it if they're even able to pay some of it, or even get caught up. It accumulates really quickly. Rent accumulates really quickly. So if they had a few couple of months that were really bad, that really adds up. And to be able to catch up is very difficult. Also, before the pandemic, many families that were cost burdened were already paying over 30% of their household income based on the annual median income for their specific area. So they were already paying more than 30%, which is too much to be able to cover all your bills and basic needs every month. After that pandemic, what research and data has shown that many of these families are paying now more than 50% of their household income, if they have one, towards housing. So it has definitely exacerbated that issue in regard household cost burden for many families, especially during the pandemic. So I have here information that I obtained in regards to Florida, the affordability crisis with high rent. Okay. So the median rent by bedrooms in Florida, as you can see here, is extremely high. For a studio, it's $1,575. This could vary, obviously, depending on the city or the area you are in and the average median income for that area. But this is kind of like a go-to. It could give you a very good idea as to how much it costs to rent an apartment. And in comparison, we'll see in a minute, you know, if you're making minimum wage, how that could, you know, poses a problem for many families. So in Florida, there's about 21% of renter households are extremely low income, right? And a maximum income for a 4% extremely low income household at a state level is about $25,100 per year, okay? So for an annual household income needed to afford a 2-bedroom rental, according to HUD's fair market rent that they determined, a family would need $50,807 a year. So if we go back to the previous slide, you can see the problem there. It's basically half, 50%, at a disadvantage to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rental. 79% of extremely low income renter households have a severe cost burden. That is extremely, extremely high and concerning. And again, I want to remind everybody, this is not something that just happened with the pandemic. It's something that existed previously. It just got severely exacerbated by the pandemic. This number in orange is pretty shocking, right? Shortage of rental homes affordable and available for extremely low income renters, we're at 400,033, which translate that for every 100 families, there's only 23 affordable and available rental units. So in Florida, that shows an extremely housing shortage inventory, especially for affordable housing. Bernicia and I were talking earlier, you know, this is very evident with subsidy programs, rental subsidy programs, that it could be years before they open applications.
Right.
And if you are lucky enough to be able to apply, you're put in a waiting list, and this waiting list is years. I've had individuals or clients that, you know, when you inquire about that, they say, well, I applied about 2 or 3 years ago, and, you know, I'm still waiting. Or hear people that have been waiting for years to get at the top of the line and be able to try to get some sort of rental subsidy.
And that was pre-COVID.
Yes, and that was pre-COVID. So now, again, because it has affected so many more people, yeah, it is worse. It's definitely going to be worse.
Professor Kassai, before we move on, I just wanted to say that for those who are unemployed, there are programs that you may be able to find in your local area. One that I know of here in the Orlando area is Career Source, that may provide possible employment for those who are affected by COVID and who are unemployed. The other thing is just a realistic statement. Pre-COVID, there were a lot of families who were a paycheck away from having a financial crisis within their homes. So like this situation, as Professor Kassai has been talking about, is something that before COVID we were already dealing with. These numbers that we're quoting now appear to be when COVID first started. So I'm curious and looking forward to seeing the numbers now. So like these numbers are not updated numbers, but they do give us a glimpse as to what the potential situation is now.
Yes, and
Wow.
where it could be. And this is why we're providing this information, is to kind of like inform people of what the real situation is, and what the outlook may be. You know, because it's just turned into a bad situation worse.
Right.
For many families, and there's a lot of families and a lot of individuals that would have never thought that they would be in this situation either.
Exactly.
So it's just trying to provide some information and resources that could hopefully alleviate some of, the financial hardship and other issues that this pandemic has brought on. So who are the populations that have been impacted by the pandemic housing crisis? I mean, everybody has.
Right.
When it comes to the housing crisis, it has been found that it has actually exacerbated already disadvantaged populations.
Exactly.
Nothing new. Blacks and African Americans, Latinx, Asians, Native American populations and communities have been hit really hard. They were already disadvantaged, facing other challenges, and then add on to that the issue of the pandemic.
Right.
Like I mentioned earlier, it has affected many, many people, but with these specific communities, it's yet hit them harder because of the disadvantages they already had pre-COVID. So some of the effects that the pandemic has had on renters, obviously the most obvious, obvious one is evictions. The risk of becoming homeless. If you lose your housing, there's a lot of a concern of homelessness. Where am I going to go if I'm evicted? As it is right now, they can't pay the rent or completely pay the rent where they're at. Forget about trying to find somewhere else that they could pay rent. And we already saw the cost of rent, at least in Florida. Unemployment, it is still a persisting issue. Many people lost their jobs and have not been able to find a new job or something equal to what they had, or their hours continue to be less than what they used to be. So unemployment continues to be a big concern and issue for renters. Negative credit impact. You can't pay your bills, you can't pay your rent. It definitely is going to have an impact on families' credit, individuals' credit. And because of that credit impact, what happens is these renters become ineligible to rent elsewhere. We all know that, prospective landlords and apartment complexes are requiring credit checks. So if you have an eviction on your record, or they have put a claim because you don't owe rent, it's going to pop up on your credit, which probably, that prospective land or apartment complex is going to say, sorry, we can't rent to you. The same with housing subsidy programs. Credit and eviction history in your record impacts your ability to be eligible for certain housing programs. And I do want to say regarding evictions and public records, those stay there. And in Florida, those stay there for 20 years. So once an eviction is filed, it's public record and it's going to be there and it's accessible to anybody, especially for prospective landlords and apartment complexes that are doing a background check on you.
So that's regardless of the disposition of the case.
It doesn't matter if you reach an agreement or if the case is dismissed. Once that's filed, it becomes public record, which creates a big hurdle, big problem for renters in Florida and elsewhere. What are some of the problems with the current efforts to alleviate the pandemic for renters? The assistance that's being offered is short-term.
Right.
So it's kind of a band-aid for now, but there's so many uncertainties moving forward after that has ended. Burden on renters to prove their hardship due to COVID. Like I mentioned earlier, COVID has affected many aspects of everybody's life. So it could be financial, it could be medical, whatever it is. So it is on the renters to prove that COVID has indeed affected them in a way where they're unable to pay their rent or pay it completely. Targeting specifically lower income renters or populations that are affected more than others. We're not saying that everybody does not deserve assistance if they need it, but like we have been mentioning, pre-COVID, there have been already some barriers and challenges that now have become worse during the pandemic. So maybe, looking at those specific groups or populations to try to alleviate something that was already bad. Also, the duration of the assistance I mean, we're in unknown territory.
Right.
Have this expectation that this will be over soon, but then we have to keep moving that deadline farther and farther away because it's taking us a little bit longer to, for this to be resolved. So this is why you're seeing that a lot of these ordinances, executive orders have continued to be extended. It's because they're thinking, okay, well, maybe by this time it's going to be resolved or alleviated. That time comes or is short to come, and it hasn't happened. So they have to continue to extend it.
So unfortunately, expectations are not necessarily reality.
Exactly. Exactly. So we've seen as to, eviction protections, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, at first it was during the summer,
right?
Then the fall, then the winter, and now we're into already 2021, and those have continued to be extended because we're still dealing with the issues.
Right.
So it's this has lasted a lot longer than what anybody would have wanted to and expected. And then again, also, not enough funding. Again, it's just a matter of trying to guess how much money and for how long. So availability of funding is another problem that has come up as trying to resolve these issues for the pandemic. So some possible solutions that have been put out there would be, for example, expanding the protection from renters beyond what's already in place. Also, long-term rental assistance programs, either expanding or improving the ones that are already in existence or creating new ones because of the pandemic or as a result of the pandemic. More affordable housing inventory, increasing that inventory for more families to be able to afford, if they have to move, find something that they could afford. Removal of barriers that cause housing inequality and discrimination, right? That could be any number of things as far as inequality and discrimination. We know that there's already laws in place for that. But it's a persistent problem. It continues to happen. So it's a continuous effort to try to remove those barriers or at least, watch out for them better. Number 5, better wages and credit protections. Of course, we talked about low wages and the impact that had pre-COVID and obviously during COVID. And then now the concerns of, credit protections, the negative credit impact that what's going on now is going to have on renters. Lastly, number 6, job security and conditions. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people were forced to go to work if their employer was still functioning during the pandemic and is still now because they needed to survive and pay the bills, exposing themselves to, getting sick and maybe spreading the virus. But since then, some groups have mobilized to try to improve not only their job security, their wages, but also their conditions. So for example, nurses have been one of those fields that have really mobilized. They're frontline workers, they're beyond essential workers, and we thank all of them for their service, as well as teachers. In many states and many cities, teachers have gotten together and basically are challenging or questioning and trying to fight for better conditions, better wages, and job security through the pandemic. So that might be another possible solution in expanding that to the labor force in the United States, including Florida. So we're going into the evictions and the pandemic. I'm gonna then turn it over to you, Ms. Mayweather, to talk to us about this section.
Yes, so as Professor Casad has been discussing, one of the biggest concerns for cost burden renters is the ability to pay and the possibility of homelessness. These are big issues, real issues. And this is something that the government, local officials, and attorneys, and even individuals have been trying to figure out how to address. So let's talk about it. Protection for renters during the pandemic. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there were several states and federal governments that enacted executive orders that provided temporary protections against evictions. And the key is, and that's what I want to definitely hone in on, is that these are temporary, so that we stay mindful and prepare for more permanent solutions. So many of these executive orders have expired. Here in Florida, ours is expired. It's no longer active.
Yeah, that was expired October 1st of 2020, the eviction moratorium.
Right. So currently, there are two main temporary protections for evictions. Those two would be the CDC eviction moratorium and the CARES Act. These protections do not offer rental payment assistance or a solution to the back due rent debt accumulated by renters, but they do offer some protection. Now, keep in mind, there might be some local organizations that may provide some type of a rental subsidy, but these two that were mentioned do not. So back in September of 2020, the CDC issued a order temporarily halting evictions in the United States. This order only addressed the non-payment of rent. That is the only cause of action that it addressed. So nothing else aside from the non-payment of rent was addressed in that order.
Move forward.
So as of recent, that order has been extended until March 31st of 2021. And there have been some modifications to the prior order. It now includes more territories and possessions, which one of the newest ones is the American Samoa. So before, the CDC order did not provide any protection, but now they do provide protection for the American Samoa.
Yeah, and the reason why is that at the inception of the order, they were lucky enough they didn't have cases or
Right.
cases. So, but now they do. So they have been included as well.
So who is covered under the CDC eviction moratorium order? Keep in mind, this is regarding residential matters. Residential meaning landlord and tenant. Landlord, tenant, residential as in someone who lives in a residential property, I should say that, or other person with a legal right to pursue eviction or possessory action, and those who provide a written CDC declaration form under the penalty of perjury. So tenant, landlord, residential property, CDC declaration has been provided in writing.
And we'll cover that in just a moment.
Okay, so what is the CDC declaration form? Now keep in mind, there was a prior form that was 2 pages. There has now been an updated form that is 1 page. And if you look in the top corner of that form, you will know it's the correct one because it states that the form expires on May 31st of 2021. So make sure that when you look this form up that you fill out the correct form. So this declaration is a sworn statement, meaning that you can be prosecuted, go to jail, or pay a fine if you lie, mislead, or omit important information. You must provide a copy of this declaration to your landlord, the owner of the residential property where you live, or other person who has a right to have you evicted or removed from where you live. I always like to tell my clients or those who I speak to, make sure you provide a paper trail. So if you have their email address, or if you deliver to them in person, kind of follow up with something in writing, stating, I provided this form to you on such and such date, get the person's name, just something to memorialize that form was delivered to the landlord. Each adult listed on the lease, rental agreement, or housing contract should complete this declaration. Make sure all of the adults who are listed on the lease or who live in that residential property complete their form, sign it.
So
For each person.
that means they each have to fill out the form. It's not like each of them signed the same form.
Right.
Okay.
And deliver all forms to the
Exactly.
landlord.
And I would add, as far as delivery, email. I mean, almost everybody have email, so you have the electronic paper trail there. If you're doing personal delivery, make sure you get some sort of receipt that it was delivered and that your landlord got it. If you're using snail mail, it's still out there. Make sure you do like certified mail where they sign the receipt that they received it.
And save that.
Exactly. And the important thing is that you have some sort of way to track that they received it. And please make sure you keep a copy for your records as well.
Right.
You might give them the original, but keep a copy for your records. So, and here, Vernicia, is the form that you were just referring to.
Exactly. So as you can see, this updated form is 1 page. Some of the verbiage at the top has been modified, and it lists some of the requirements, or I should say, it lists the requirements in order to fill out this form. And I just wanted to note in bold at the bottom, it states, even if you have provided a declaration to your landlord, the order does not prevent your landlord from seeking a hearing if authorized by state or local law in accordance with state or local court procedures. I mention that because I want people to keep in mind, this in Florida does not stop a landlord from filing an eviction action. So that's very important, because I don't want people to think that they are free and clear by just delivering this form to the landlord. There are other steps that need to be taken. So
yeah, I've seen that a lot. The false sense that maybe they believe this form provides, and you and I have interaction with, families where even though they provide the form, they still get served with eviction papers. They're like, wait a minute, I thought they couldn't do that. So it's good for everybody to understand that this is just merely a protection or a defense to an eviction action.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily stop the landlord or whoever is entitled to file for an eviction to go ahead and do so.
And a little later, we will discuss some of the situations where we've seen how this order has protected the tenants. So what am I declaring to in the CDC declaration form? This is important because you are using this as a protection. So if one of these is found to be untrue, it's as if it's all or none. So, and these things are important because I've seen in eviction cases where the plaintiff, which could be either the landlord or the landlord's attorney, has used one of these requirements against the tenant, and we will discuss that. So one, the CDC declaration requires that you attest that you have used your best efforts to attain all available government assistance for rent or housing. So if in your area there are local programs that provide rental subsidy, and you are found to not have applied to that or sought any kind of assistance, that could be used against you later on. So make sure that you try to use your best efforts to obtain some assistance to pay your rent or housing. Number two.
And keep record of your application, any communications you receive from the organization. And these factors that, Vernicia is talking about, these are the factors that are listed in the CDC form. So just make sure you keep records of any efforts you have made to try to get rental subsidy assistance. Because unfortunately, you might have to prove that in court.
So maybe start a journal or something, listing who, what, when, and why, time, date, name of the person that you contacted, the phone number that you called, and the conversation that you had with them.
Yep.
You are your own advocate. Okay, so number two, You must attest that you either expect to earn no more than $99,000 in annual income for a calendar year of 2020 to 2021, or no more than $198,000 if filing a joint tax return. Was not required to report any income in 2020. So that could be like those who receive Social Security disability benefits, or receive an economic impact payment stimulus check pursuant to Section 2201 of the CARES Act. So make sure that you look at your income.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think that the IRS knows all. You don't want this to come and bite you later on.
Big brother, yeah. So that, if you got that stimulus check, you need to keep record that you got it.
Number 3, you are unable to pay your full rent or make a full housing payment due to substantial loss of household income, loss of compensable. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, Professor. Let me put these compensable hours of work or wages, layoffs, or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. So this may be something that you have to prove, that you are unable to pay your rent. Now, just because you're unable to pay full does not mean that you don't have to pay partial. And that brings us to number 4. So you are using your best efforts to make timely partial payments that are as close to the full amount that as the individual circumstances may permit. Also taking into account any other non-discretionary discretionary expenses. So I've had this used against a tenant where the attorney alleged that they did not try to make any payments. There were no efforts made to make a partial payment. Something, even if nominal. Like that can help you later on if you have to prove it in court. And that is important. Like, keep in mind that these things can be used against you. You are saying that this is your situation, so you must be able to prove it later on if need be.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, as far as proving your loss of income, that could be a letter of communication from your employer laying you off, that you're furloughed, your application to unemployment compensation. That, I guess that would be another thing to talk about later.
Right.
If you're receiving those benefits, all those type of communications you must keep copy of to prove that loss or reduction of household income, as well as what Manisha's talking about, efforts to make the payments. Keep copies of either electronic payments, if you're using like Zelle, Venmo, or something like that. If you're doing money orders, make sure you keep those receipts that you can track later if they have been cashed, or actual payment receipts that you might have received from your landlord regarding any type of payments that you have made.
And I feel compelled to say this. Be mindful of what you put on social media. Mm-hmm. If you're saying that you have difficulty paying your rent, but you're posting the purchase of a new car or purchases online,
vacations, travel,
these things can be used against you.
Yes, they can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what are you declaring to in the form continued? Number 5, if evicted, I will likely become homeless and have to move into a homeless shelter, or need to move into a new residence shared by other people who will live in close quarters because I have no other available housing options. I think that's self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm. And that's the whole reason why the CDC enacted this order, was to avoid people congregating in already, crowded areas, shelters with families and friends. That's basically the main purpose, is to avoid that.
Right, to help reduce the spread of the virus.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Number 6, I understand that I must still pay rent or make a housing payment and comply with other obligations that I may have under my tenancy, lease agreement, or a similar contract. Keep in mind, this is just a reminder to you that you still have a contractual obligation, whether it's written or verbal.
Yeah.
You still have to comply with it. I
Yeah,
further understand that fees, penalties, or interest for not paying rent or making a housing payment on time, as required by my tenancy, lease agreement, or other similar contract, may still be charged or collected. This does not prevent your landlord from suing you for damages, money damages.
yeah. So this means rent is not waived. You're still obligated to pay rent, either now or later. And late fees, penalties, yeah, those are all subject also later to be collected by your landlord. Again, the moratorium, this form only helps stop the eviction. It does not give any relief as to, the financial aspect of it.
Right. And number 7, you further understand that at the end of this temporary halt on evictions on March 31st, 2021, my housing provider may require payment in full for all payments not made prior to and during the temporary halt, and failure to pay may make me subject to eviction pursuant to state and local laws. Well, as we've been discussing, it does not stop the landlord from currently filing eviction action. But I have seen where the CDC Declaration form was filed in conjunction with the tenant's answer, where the judge has used that to allow them to enter an order staying the issuance of a writ of possession, or the continuation of the case. So it just kind of halts it. It stays the case, but the case is still pending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to have to be dealt with sooner or later.
So what protections does the CDC not include, the CDC order not include? As we've been discussing, this does not relieve any individual of any obligation to pay rent or make a housing payment. You still have to pay eventually. Mm-hmm. Just giving you some time now. It does not provide protection for non-compliance with any other obligation that the individual may have under the tenancy, lease, or similar contract. So if there's something that you are not complying with pursuant to the agreements, they can pursue an eviction action based on that. Mm-hmm. Just not the non-payment. Nothing in the order precludes the charging or collecting of fees, penalties, or interest as a result of the failure to pay rent or other housing payment on a timely basis under the terms of any applicable contract. Just reiterating again that these fees are accruing and they are still due and owed to the landlord. Nothing in the order precludes evictions based on a tenant, lessee, or resident engaging in criminal activity while they're on the premises, threatening the health or safety of other residents, damaging or posing an immediate and significant risk of damage to the property. Don't do that. Violating or any applicable building code, health ordinance, or similar regulation relating to health and safety, or violating any other contractual obligation other than the timely payment of rent or similar housing related payment, including non-payment or late payments of fees, penalties, or interest. Lately, I have seen landlords that have been moving forward with evictions based on the non-renewal of a tenancy or the termination of a tenancy. And those evictions are not protected under the CDC order. So they're moving forward with those. So keep that in mind.
So what you're talking about is like, I had a written lease and expired.
And a lot of leases have expired during the pandemic.
Yep. So what a lot of landlords are doing are not renewing that lease. So because they're finding the loopholes to the protection, right?
Right.
Because, nowadays it's kind of easy for a family to prove that they've been impacted by COVID as far as their income and ability to pay. So, if they can prove that in court, it's like you just mentioned, the eviction is going to be stayed. It's going to be stopped. It's not going to go away. It's just going to stop. Rather than circumventing that by just saying, well, your lease is up. Here's the notice. I'm not going to renew it. You need to move out. Mm-hmm. And the issue is that once that deadline comes and, the family doesn't have where to go, that's when they move and file for the eviction. And the CDC protection form is not going to do anything because it doesn't apply. So we're, like Renisha's saying, we're seeing more and more of these. I mean, we've been in this already a year. So yes, many of these lease agreements have expired, and a lot of landlords are taking that option rather than going down the non-payment route for the eviction. They're doing basically the terminations.
Exactly. So the CARES Act. Now, the CARES Act is another of temporary protection in eviction cases. The CARES Act prohibits some landlords from charging fees or penalties for late payments between March 27th and July 25th of 2020. After July 25th of 2020, the landlord must give a tenant written notice at least 30 days before filing an eviction case in court. So this is important because a lot of these, sometimes people don't realize that cases can be won on technicalities. So mark the dates that you're receiving things, and that matters. That matters.
Yeah, and what's also important to highlight here, it prohibits some landlords. And
right.
I know you're going to explain that now. It doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to some landlords, some tenants.
And who, may you ask? The act applies to landlords who participate in federal housing programs such as HUD-funded or LIHTC, or those who have a federally backed mortgage such as HUD, FHA, VA, USDA, Fannie, or Freddie. The act does not eliminate or waive rent.
Which is the same as with the CDC. They're not, the remedy's not like waiving rent or payment. It's just to stop evictions.
Right. So, as we've been stating, and to reiterate, your landlord can still file an eviction lawsuit against you for other reasons, similar to the CDC eviction moratorium limitations. So if your landlord has a multifamily federally backed mortgage that is in forbearance, your landlord cannot evict you for non-payment of rent or charge late fees during the forbearance. There are ways for you to see if this applies to you. I believe there will be a link, if I'm not mistaken, correct. So make sure you go to use these links to do your own due diligence to figure out if these, if the CARES Act applies to you. So.
Yeah, Florida eviction protection. These links, how they help the renters is to verify if your landlord or the property you are renting is a participant. They're backed by an FHA, VA, USDA type of mortgage. Then in addition to the COVID moratorium, you might be entitled to this protection.
Right.
In addition, also to verify, if they're in a forbearance program because they can't pay the mortgage themselves, which is, also an impact of the pandemic, is on homeowners as well. So if they're in a forbearance program, they also, like Vernisha highlighted, there's certain limitations as landlords they can take to try to evict the tenants that are occupying that home.
Exactly.
The links that you can go to in regards to verifying either if the home or the property that you're renting in falls under the CARES Act.
All right. So what happens if my landlord files for an eviction? And keep in mind, this is Florida specific. So all others, make sure that you consult with an attorney in your state regarding this, this information. So once you are served, and keep in mind, you can be served by them merely posting the summons with the complaint and the attachments on your door. Or you can be served individually, or someone in your home can be served on your behalf. So, and that's not just, those are not the end all list of ways to be served, but that is just an example of how you can be served. Once you are served, you must file within 5 days, not including weekends and in legal holidays after getting served with an eviction complaint the following and answered, and attach a copy of the COVID-19 declaration that you delivered to your landlord. So that's why this is important, because this should not be the first time that your landlord sees that form. Mm-hmm. It must have been filed or served on your landlord prior to this. Be prepared to produce supporting documents of your financial hardship and payments. That's why we were going through the ways that you should make sure that you keep record of how to prove what you attested to in the CDC Declaration form, because now this is where it's going to matter. There is also a payment component in Florida in evictions. So you can either file the amount that the landlord is alleging that you owe in the court registry within those 5 days, or file a motion to determine rent. I won't go into that too much here. I would advise you to consult with an attorney to explain that to you, but you must do all. You can't just do one. So you must file an answer and comply with the financial component by either depositing the amount due pursuant to what the landlord sent in the complaint, or file a motion to determine rent. Those must be filed at the same time. So number 4 states, try to seek legal advice from an attorney as soon as possible. This is so important. Time is of the essence in these cases. So you want to make sure that you, even if not seeking legal representation, you are obtaining what your options, your potential options are in your case. And just to let you know, we work with Virgil Hawkins, which is a pro bono program in conjunction with FAMU College of Law, and we provide free service, free services to those who qualify based on some financial situations.
Income eligibility.
Yes. So find your resources and use them. Do not sit and do nothing.
We understand it's difficult, and a lot of times because of the situations, people are in denial. Do not ignore it. Definitely do not ignore it. So if this is to happen, like, Vernisha mentioned, you only have 5 days to respond to an eviction in Florida. That's a very short time. So at least, try to do something to kind of delay the process if you're having difficulties trying to find, at least a consultation. But there's so many legal services out there that are willing to assist individuals, even with a consultation. Right. To kind of explain to you what your options are, and maybe some sort of plan of action, and even, result in legal representation. But don't leave it for later. Be proactive. If you know what's coming, even before you get served, reach out, look out. Right. If you can sit down and speak with an attorney regarding your case.
Be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Professor, I apologize and thank you for stepping in there for a minute. I get choked up on this because we are dealing with a lot of people who are in need, and my heart goes out to them. But, well, there's no but, period. With that said, just to reiterate again, do your due diligence, be proactive, seek out what your potential options are, because there may be other options other than ones you currently see or know about.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes, and a lot of time there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. You might think one thing and then it turned out to be another. I mean, you and I have spoken to individuals and families that they think that, oh, there's a moratorium out there. They absolutely cannot do anything, and are totally surprised when they receive, either a notice or paperwork from the courthouse, an eviction complaint. And one of the first things they say, well, they weren't supposed to do this. It's illegal. And they're in shock when we tell them, well, it's not.
Right.
They'll go ahead and move forward with eviction. So like we were just saying, if you are struggling to pay your rent or are facing eviction, especially due to the pandemic, make sure to fill out and deliver that CDC COVID-19 declaration form. This is the link that you could go to get that form, cdc.gov. that easy. That is the agency that has created this form. So, obviously they're reliable to have the most updated and appropriate form. The form is in English and in Spanish. Don't ignore any documents that you get from court. They're not going to go away.
Right.
Try to handle that situation the sooner the better, even if even before it happens, if you know it's going to come. And then, like we've been saying, contact your local legal aid, your local legal services, local bar associations, and speak with an attorney. Try to get at least a consultation. You also have the option of contacting the Florida Bar Referral Service. Phone number is right there, 800-342-8011. And they have an attorney referral service. I tell you that because of the pandemic, there has been a great response from the legal community, grassroots organizations, community service organizations in trying to assist renters during this situation. Maybe they won't be able to provide you certain specific services, but I can guarantee you they can refer you to somebody who might be able to assist you with whatever specifics you need. It's like Vernicia was mentioning, it's being proactive and trying to find out what's out there to be able to assist you. Lastly, we want to encourage you to just check and see in your area, your county, your city, your state, what programs are out there that are still active and available for rental subsidy programs. Again, that's one thing that Vernicia mentioned was very important, and that, it's being challenged in court is, your diligence in trying to find assistance to kind of make up that gap of loss of income and be able to pay your rent, if not in full, but at least in part. So I know there might be still some certain programs available out there. I don't want to mention anything in specific because of deadlines.
Right.
That this airs, I don't know if they have expired. So, but we do encourage you to definitely do that research and find out what's out there available for you. So,
Professor Kasai, before we conclude, question, because in reading the CDC declaration form, it does not say that thoughts. If an eviction action has already been filed against a tenant and they did not deliver the CDC declaration form prior to the eviction, would you recommend that they go ahead and still deliver that to the landlord?
I would still recommend they deliver it. I mean, it's a matter of then the landlord or the attorney challenging the timeliness of the form. Just because the form is not there does not mean that the renter's circumstances are not the same.
Right.
The loss of income was due to the pandemic. The shortage of hours was due to the pandemic. That they've, made the efforts to try to find some sort of rental assistance or subsidy. Those might still be there. So, I would still try to get use of that form. Chances are obviously that they might have to prove their case in court and overcome whatever challenges either the landlord or the attorney for the landlord would bring against that.
And with that said, if during the pendency of an eviction, a defendant or a tenant does not have representation, do you recommend that they still seek representation?
Yes.
And I say that, or I ask that, because I want people to know that just because you think that no other efforts can be done, there still may be a chance that something can be done to assist you in your eviction, to give you some time to figure it out, to potentially work something out with the landlord, like a move out date, wherein you move out and then the landlord agrees to voluntarily dismiss the case. There are options.
It's just, either minimizing the impact of having to move or, finding other options, other solutions that they might have not known about. And, after talking to an attorney, come to the realization or find out that they have. I think the earlier the better you contact it, it's the best plan of action. But because of circumstances, things happen, life happen. I would still recommend you go speak with an attorney. It might be that legally or, for the court proceeding, there's not much else that can be done. But like I mentioned earlier, and like you just said, they might present some other solutions or options that, the family might not have considered. So I think it's always good to be well informed or as best as possible from reliable sources.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, that being said, we want to thank everybody for joining us. And like we said, any questions, concerns that you're struggling regarding your rent, please contact an attorney and stay safe. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ms. Mayweather.
Thank you.